Yeah, our session here is deploying automation strike teams in your organization. We've been with Decisions now almost 2 years. Just some of the lessons we've learned as we've implemented Decisions into our company. There's us, contact information. If you have questions afterwards, Brady, go ahead.
So I'm Brady Shorts. I'm an engineering manager at Conservice. I've been at Conservice for about 11 years and currently live in Utah. That's where the headquarters is there. And it's very nice, but I love the beach here. It's very nice. I have a bachelor's degree in computer information systems, and so I'm over a development group of about 6 developers, and we work on desktop applications, web applications, and now Decisions.
Yeah, I'm Tyson, Hamblin, product owner, also in Utah. I've been with Conservice about 7 years, started out as an entry-level billing manager, became a product manager and started leading the transformative work to try and automate our systems here. What we're going over, we want to talk about who Conservice is. We're not really a household name outside of our industry. The problem we're facing, our first attempt at a solution, what we've learned, and how we are right now. And then any questions that you may have.
Cool. So has anybody heard of Conservice before?
That doesn't have a blue tag on?
We got a couple. That's cool. The other sessions, we didn't have any. That's cool. What Conservice is we're a third-party utility management company. So we manage utilities mostly for apartment complexes, some single-family homes as well for different types of communities. And we know a lot about utilities. We kind of label ourselves, as you can see, the utility experts. So anything about utilities we strive to know and to know really well. We have 2 main departments in our business: Synergy, which involves collecting, auditing, and paying provider bills. When you're in an apartment complex, normally you would get one big provider bill for the entire unit or building or all of the units. So a water or sewer bill, for example, would be a bill for the entire building. Your gas bill, electric bill, whatever the utility may be. So our Synergy department would take those provider bills, pay them for the client, and our client would pay us back. Then we have another side of that, which is our billing department, which takes those provider bills and we split them up in between all of the tenants. And we calculate all of their bills, and then we send them a monthly bill. We mail millions of provider bills every single month to recoup that cost that the apartment owners have. So part of the complexity that we have in our business and why we chose to go with Decisions, first off, we have a lot of different billing methods, ways that we can calculate that tenant bill. One of our most common ones is a sub-metered. So you have a meter on the side of your house. It measures electricity, or maybe you have it inside that measures your water. There's a lot of different types of meters that go along with that, a lot of ways that we can receive reads of those meters. Another common way is called a ratio utility billing system, which is a RUBS, we call it. And we can actually, if we don't have a sub-meter, we take your occupancy, your square footage, how many people are in each bedroom, just different ways to calculate that bill. So we take that big provider bill and we split it up based off of those ratios. On top of that, we have regulations. So whether that be a city regulation, state, region, even United States regulations that tell us how you can be billed a utility. So for example, we have a sub-meter that's not getting reads back. It's just always saying you use 0 usage. Some regulations require us to bill out that 0 usage and you get a $0 bill. Some say we can only estimate so many months. There's just a lot of different regulations. Client markets, we are currently in the military space, campus apartments. We deal a lot with student housing. We also have commercial, and then we also have mixed tenants and commercial in a lot of spaces. The bottom section could be like a store, and then the rest of the high tower building could be all tenants and apartment complex. So we kind of have a mix there. And then client requests. So anything that our clients ask us to do, whether that be build this a certain way, or I own 3 different apartment complexes, I want them all billed differently for whatever reason. So a lot of complexity that goes into calculating a bill. And they have to be on time every month, and they have to be accurate. If they're not accurate, then nobody's happy. We have to recoup all of that cost for the client, and there's a lot of complexity that goes into that. Dealing with millions of tenant bills every single month, we have to make sure that they're good. So we decided to go with decisions. That was a really good choice for us, and we wanted to build a system that could handle our build calculation, our data quality control, and our client communications. Those are the pieces that we decided that we were going to automate. We thought we were doing a pretty good job in-house automating that, but on the next slide, Tyson will talk about how well we were actually doing and why decisions was made to help us automate.
Yeah, and to answer your first two questions, we are fun at parties, and we will talk utilities when we're at those parties, so we love our utilities. Our problem that we're facing, on average, on our good path, it was taking us 9 days from start to finish to get these bills calculated. Worst path was 30 days, which isn't great when you're supposed to be doing it once a month and you're sending it out the day before it's due or the day it is due. We were having struggles getting through that process here. We found that there were 93% variance. We were finding that because of all the complexity, that a property would have user interaction and force it up a path because of a regulation and then down a different path because of a client request. And as we looked at our properties, 93% of them were taking a unique path through our system. And only 2% made it through without human touching. It just went through by itself. Only 2% was automated. Big shout out for these slides here. We have a really awesome tool that allows us to pull all these analytics out. It actually comes with decisions. It's process mining. If you haven't used process mining yet, make sure it's installed before you leave today. It's absolutely fantastic. We love it to show to our operations. It helped us down this path once we saw this. It looks like this. This was our process map. We're like, oh, that's great. Look at them. This is kind of the process we're expecting as it goes through the different steps of doing that bill calculation. That's for 6% of steps. When we expanded that out and we saw all the variance we had, this could go in a museum as a piece of art. As properties would start over here on the left and have to end up in all of these different locations to end up here at the end on the right. This was causing that 9 to 30 day issue of having to jump all over this, right? Not great process. A lot of work to do, right?
So what we decided to do, we got decisions installed and we started on this project. We needed to rewrite our billing platform. The bill calculation, we needed to be accurate. So what we did was we took 13 traditional .NET C# developers on my team and on another engineering team, and we threw them into decisions. We created hundreds of user stories and we said, this is what this piece needs to do, this is what this piece needs to do, and we said, developers, go at it. We had people like Tyson that was helping us make sure that the logic was correct, and then we would help with any code reviews or design reviews or anything like that. And to kind of show you how many 13 developers is, we have a graphic that shows really, it's a lot of people.
For any project, really. We
went through beginner training, advanced, so we went through all the training and did that, all 13 of us, so that we could learn and understand decisions. So after we started building, we created a lot of flows. We were able to build an MVP, a minimum viable product, and get something out to operations. They were super excited because we got it out in 3 months. So the speed of development was awesome, right? Easy access to the data layer. My development team would take our database and make connections to that in the form of a REST API. And so we could access our database, we could save information to our database. That made it really nice to be able to plug into decisions. And then quick access to flows and deployment, which meant that we could deploy anytime. Currently, our desktop legacy system, we have a monthly cadence of when we release that. And so with 100 people developing on that same system, it's really hard to put all of that into balance and do a production build. With decisions, we can release a lot quicker. Some disadvantages, though, as you can imagine, 13 developers building one project, too many cooks in the kitchen. That's basically what it amounted to. So we had 13 people creating the same subflows that somebody else was creating. We had REST API calls that were built and serving up the same data that another REST API call was doing. We had duplicate data structures. So from those REST API calls, we had data structures that we would create in decisions. And we had a piece of data, let's say a tenant, that could have a first name, last name, address, email address, etc. We had 22 different versions of that tenant object. Just because a developer would get in, they would have this user story, they would complete the task, and they would deploy it. 22 different things that were the exact same, almost, because some of those data structures would have extra pieces of data. One of the tenant objects would have the email address and another one wouldn't. So we created converter flows that would convert one object to another. Clearly that it didn't work out too well. There's a lot of overlap, there was a lot of superfluous API calls, a lot of tech debt that we were creating, but we were going really fast. So we were excited about that, but obviously we could see some disadvantages.
And just to really make this a real PowerPoint, race car, spinny cog. There you go.
So like I said, operations was super happy. We were putting stuff out. Our MVP didn't cover 100% of our use case. And we knew that going in. We didn't try to do that. We tried to take a small use case and really do a good MVP. And they saw that we were doing a good job. And they wanted us to do a little bit more. We came out to Submerse and learned about data-driven design. We learned about process mining, and we're able to plug that in and throw our processes in there and really see some things that we needed to change. Like I said, we were creating some tech debt, we were creating some projects that we really didn't need to do. So what we did is we came back from that and we stepped back and we said, we need to stop and do something better. We obviously have created something really cool, but these are the three things that we learned after that. One was find the right people, both on the operations side, development side, data-driven design, and standards of excellence. So creating documentation, making sure everybody's on the same page.
Perfect. Yeah, finding the right people. This was, we found to be integral. There's some challenges from the operations side coming in and learning decisions, some different challenges from a developer side coming in and learning decisions. The first thing to acknowledge is that it is a new platform stack. It's a new technology stack, making sure that people understand, like, it's not C#, but it's also not Lucidchart. It's a combination of both. You look at it from the operations side, and you have a business analyst, someone who's good at drawing out processes. And worst case scenario, they draw a process map in Visio or Lucidchart, and it does nothing, no one cares about it, and it just lives in their folder, and we never look at it again. Best case scenario, you go in, you do your BPMN notation, you get all of your shapes and objects correct, so that it accurately depicts what your logic is doing, and then it still does nothing. It's still just a document that you look at. On the developer side, you can go in and you can use the best code, the best coding practices. It's super fast. Your database team is super happy with your C# code and your access. And then you get to your operations user and they go, well, this doesn't work. Logically, it doesn't do what we've asked it to do, and you have to start over. Or worst case scenario, you build something that works, but it's 20,000 lines of code. And if you need to make a change, what are you going to do with that? Like, you're not going to look at that 20,000, you're going to rewrite it, right? And then there's whole other complications with that. Recognizing that there is a learning curve in decisions, it's a new tech stack, finding the right people is important. Josh didn't make it back in. We usually shout Josh out for our process coach. He was amazing helping us get off the ground. Will's here though, lunch and learn. Make sure you get to lunch and learns. We try to go stump Will all the time in lunch and learn when we have problems, so you're welcome, Will. The decisions team is awesome at supporting you as you're going through this. Make sure you're learning and taking advantage of those resources. Because once you get over that knowledge gap, it becomes really easy to build and go from there. I'm sure Will gets nervous now when I show up in lunch and learn. He's like, uh-oh. Cool. On the operations side, this is what we started looking for. We realized that just one person leading 13 people wasn't going to work. We needed a few more people that were going to be able to help us build this logic layer. So we wanted to find people that were logic-focused power users, those people in your operations that know, and those are the people you go to and say, okay, tell me how this works, or they know how things works. Experience with logic flow design is fantastic. If they have that knowledge of, and I've seen people map logic out in Excel, if you go here and then they click a button, it goes through. If they have that experience, that's very beneficial. And then comfortable breaking some eggs. This was kind of interesting. We actually, as we were teaching some of our operations people this, they were paralyzed by the idea of their chart and their diagram now could actually do something to the system. There was worry that, okay, I built this logic very similar to a Lucidchart doc, but now I could accidentally delete the entire database. And so understanding like, okay, no, it's okay. Like that's why we have a dev environment, and you can break some eggs in dev so we don't break eggs in production. And then this one is nice to have basic programming familiarity. Those people that have taken maybe like 1 or 2 boot camps, just understanding that some general programming best practices, like don't take a loop and on the next iteration hook it back up to itself. Like don't do that. Don't make infinite loops. That's very beneficial as well.
On the development side, there are some key things that we pinpointed for our developers. And for our developers, when we talked to them about working in decisions, some of them were just well, I could write this in C#, I could write this in C++, I could write this in JavaScript, whatever that language may be that they're really focused on, I could write this in that. That is totally fine. That's their strength, and that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to focus on their strengths and what they actually wanted to come to work and be happy about. And that's great. But there were a few developers that did have some key things that we wanted to kind of pinpoint that worked really well in decisions. And in a couple slides, we'll go over the roles and how we kind of split that up. But things that we looked for were outcome-driven and positive attitude. So those are, good things anyway. But having a positive attitude about decisions. Yes, you can code that, and you can do a great job at it, but we're not ticket takers. We don't want to have to change that logic in a month when we have a new regulation, when we have a new client, when we have a new client request. Big picture perspective is really good as well. Like I said, we're not ticket takers. We don't just focus on the one ticket and then move on. How does that fit into the big picture? What is the outcome for the client? What is operations going to gain from this, and how are they going to progress? Willingness to learn, obviously, like Tyson said, willingness to learn a new tech stack. This is a new tech stack. It is a different language. So the willingness to do that and take the time to do that. And then the experience with front-end development, I put on there kind of as a nice to have, not absolutely necessary. But I found that those developers with a front-end mindset were a little bit better in decisions because they have that flow design. They see how users will see information, not only with our front-end forms and things that operations will use, but also creating nice and pretty flows that will be used for documentation so operations can see that. We don't have all these ugly flows that have lines overlapping and all the steps are jumbled into one place. Having that front-end development experience kind of helped with that as well.
So we started with our 13 developers. We didn't make this one animated, so you didn't have to wait. We switched over to more of Strikeforce teams here, where we brought in some more operations designers, with them leading the charge into that logic layer. Since they're the experts in that logic layer, they know what it should be doing. As we got them trained up, they were able to take on that role, and then we supported them with our developers. So we would reach out to them and say, hey, we need this point of data from the legacy database, and they would help build the REST API call, get the structures into decisions, get it ready to go. Then the operations can just drag and drop that API call step, and they're off to going to finish off their logic layer. And all of this being supported by our engineering leads. We recognize that because Decisions is a coding platform, it should be kept inside a coding software development lifecycle, SDLC, to make sure that you're not releasing flows that delete the database, right? Make sure that as we're doing our logic layer and our data access layer, that they're working well together. So we split up into teams like this to start tackling our rewrite.
So we have these different layers that we talk about when we decided to do this project into Decisions. We obviously have our database where all the data is stored, whether that be our legacy database or new databases, wherever that is. We have another layer that's the data access layer. That is our REST API layer that accesses the database. It kind of gives a buffer in between Decisions, which is our business logic layer. And then we have our presentation layer, which is what operations gets to play with and interact with and run flows from. So in our first iteration, when we first got Decisions up and running and we spun it up, this is what we started doing with those 13 developers. We had our database, and we would access those through an API, through the data access layer, but we would mix it with our business logic layer. We would create flows where we would get a piece of data, and then we would do some logic with that inside that one flow. And then maybe we needed another piece of data, and we'd call another one and do some more logic. And then we would build 100 more flows the exact same way. So mixing those data access and those REST API calls with our logic made it pretty messy. And then our presentation layer with ops was, they didn't see any difference though, but it created a lot of tech debt for us, and it was really hard to maintain. So what we did is we separated those layers. So obviously we still have our database layer. Our data access layer is completely separate from our business logic layer, being decisions. That does all of the logic that we need. The key thing here is that our data access layer, if we ever needed to change anything in the data access layer, the REST API call, change it to a GraphQL API call, change our database from SQL Server to Postgres to NoSQL, whatever we needed to do, we can do that all in one place. We don't have to do that in every single flow that we have those data access calls from, which made it really nice so we could pass objects through the entire flow. It could do some logic in there and then save that data down to a database if we needed to. Made it really nice so that if we do have to change our database or objects or create more fields, we just have to do that in one place. We don't have to do that all throughout the flows, worry about breaking flows, and we have to put out a new version that could potentially break everything that operations sees on that presentation layer. We don't want to touch that presentation layer or have operations be affected by that.
Yeah, we found that operations doesn't really care if you're using NoSQL or Postgres. They just care when you break their logic layer, right? Making this separation here allows us to isolate and keep that logic layer separate from all the cool stuff that's happening in technology. There's lots of cool stuff happening. But by allowing you to protect that logic layer inside of decisions, by separating those layers, it keeps you safe as you move forward. As long as those contracts stay the same, your logic is the same. You're not having to go in and worry, oh, this is now broken, and where else has it broken at? Usually your business logic layer doesn't change often. Usually adding and maybe taking away a little bit, but the core functionality of why you're in business is still around, regardless of what happens on that left-hand side. My left, well, yeah, their left. Cool. At this time, we also wanted to create a standards of excellence. So what our engineering leads were leading up here, we recognize that separating those layers, and because decisions is a tech stack that can cause issues if you release bad flows, wanted to make sure we defined our roles so we knew who was responsible for what. We gave it a development life cycle to make sure we're following proper and good practices for releasing coding. And then documentation is absolutely critical for those that are either trying to learn it from the logic side of the business or those developers who come afterwards that need to learn what our processes are doing. So as we split up our roles here, we pushed the logic layers we talked about to our ops designers. We lead the charge in making sure that the logic is functioning how the business expects it to function. Any type of data access we need, we reach out to Brady's team and they help write up the APIs, get us access to that data. We're also responsible for flow documentation health and unit test health. If you come from operations and you don't know what unit tests are, developers love unit tests. So make sure to ask them how to make them. Make sure that they're in your flows and that they're working so that as you deploy, you can make sure your logic is the same as it goes up. And we're also responsible to make sure that the rollout of these projects and adoption in operations happens.
On the developer side, we're in charge of the data. So getting the data, saving the data, that's what we're in charge of. So those developers that really want to type on the keys and to do all the code, let them do that. That's their strength, that's what they want to do. But we can have developers in there helping with flow design when needed, configuration with all of the settings, server settings, configuring those REST services, creating those data services, those data layers inside decisions so they can just be dragged and dropped by somebody like Tyson. Isolating those REST services and isolating our getting and saving of the data is also super important. So just like Tyson mentioned, you can't delete the entire database, even if you wanted to. Also, we have some different APIs that maybe be a little bit sensitive. We have APIs that can get HR information, for example. We don't want everybody to be able to access all of that information. So isolating that, making sure that permissions are correct, making sure that tokens are correct and everything is correct, that's what we do on the development side. That's what we own and that's what we do really well at. And then we can help support in development and creating flows and that when we need to.
Yeah, the funny thing with decisions is as you start releasing projects, they want more projects faster. And so we do lean on our devs to help us get those projects started up quickly as they help build out some of the logic flows. So we're very grateful when they do that. And then we both are responsible for maintaining these standards of excellence. We have our role set up and a few other things that the life cycle will talk about in documentation, just making sure that both are responsible for that and accountable for that.
So going over our development lifecycle, we created this process that we follow, and we follow every single time. That's what's key. It's really hard to deploy something, and then once you deploy it, you're good to go. Don't have to worry about anything ever again, right? But if we follow these steps every single time with every story that we do, with every flow that we do, it really makes it so it's maintainable, but also we don't have as much tech debt. So we're not spending time just trying to fix things. We get to build the new cool things. We get to build the new websites and things that interact with the flows and operations uses. So step one, design and review. So Tyson touched on this a little bit. Collaboration with operations or whoever the stakeholders are. We get into Lucidchart or whatever tool we need. Sometimes we actually get into decisions and we open up a blank flow and we start putting placeholder steps in what the process they want to do, just so they can visually see what we're trying to do. It also gives us a step up into number two, which is the actual development process. We can take those placeholder steps and then drag in our steps that we actually need to hit data or to save data or to do any type of logic that we need to. Making unit tests, that is a must. Which goes into our code review. And we'll kind of touch on the documentation piece as well and the review process, but this is something that we do on every single project. We do a code review on the development side to make sure that everything developmentally is sound, making sure that the flows aren't accessing the data layer 100 times when you only need to do it once. Infinite loops, there's a lot of different things that we review both on the development side and on the operation side to make sure that the flows are looking good. After that, we actually have a few different environments that we push up our project to, from development to QA, staging, into production. And we do this on every single flow as well, in every project, just to make sure that everything moves up to how it needs to. Yes, it works on development, but once we get into another environment, does it still work? Did you use a flow that somebody else created for another project that you shouldn't have? Well, that doesn't exist on QA or staging because they're not done with that project, or that dependency you shouldn't have used in the first place. So that really helps us to make sure that once we go to production, we are confident that it works exactly how it needs to. And then the fifth, which is one of the most important parts, is the documentation and flow health. So documentation, usually after a development team pushes something out to production, we're done. We move on to the next project, we move on to the next ticket, the next story. But documentation, we really have to spend time and plan to spend time on the documentation piece. Then we won't have tribal knowledge. Then we won't have developers going into it next month wondering why this is written the way that it is. Everybody knows exactly how it works, both on the operations side and the development side.
Yeah, and as we jump in, documentation is so critical. If you're from the operations side, this graphic might not be something you're familiar with, but you know this process. You've gone and you've inputted data into a black box of logic built by a full stack developer, and it comes back and it's completely wrong. And you're like, I have no idea what just happened. And I chat Brady and I say, Brady, why does this not work? And he goes, well, you put it in wrong. And I'm like, oh, I thought I put it in right. And you don't know what it is you're trying to do. And sometimes you put in data and it comes out and you're like, yay, it's good. And I don't know how it did it, but I'm happy and I send it out. And you end up like these guys, and you're just like, it kind of works sometimes. If you haven't had the opportunity, Decisions allows you to auto-document your projects. Wasn't able to put the full web page, but it actually puts out an HTML web page that you can view. It shows you the snapshot of your flow, gives you a bunch of score health items over here so that you can see what it is that you're missing. I didn't pass, as you can see, 75, that's only a C. I'm missing unit tests, that's on me, some validation issues, and I missed my description. Getting those filled out, making sure this is 100% so that it's documented well. Renaming your steps, making sure that those steps make sense so that an operations user can come in, understand this diamond, oh, that's a rule table, and this is the charge to calculate. I can understand that as an operations user. And the folder documentation actually can be hit by an API, so you can actually export these out to any external knowledge bases that you use. Confluence, we use an internal one as well. So they can just be up there and ready to be documented. So please document, that way both operations and development know what's going on. Yay, we're happy. Cool, so lessons of the rewrite. So we sat down, we got ourselves into the strike forces, centers of excellence, made sure we separated our data layer appropriately. This new model, if you don't know what data-driven design is, this is one thing we learned at Submerse. Make sure to talk with someone from Decisions about it. It's absolutely fantastic. It's given us flexibility, accuracy, and speed. We haven't had to redo flows or recreate flows because we can just add new logic pieces to rule tables to call new pieces of information. It's fantastic. And operations is in love with the process, which is really hard to get going. Once you do and they fall in love with the process, it's great because then they start adopting it. And this is why they love it. Our blue line here, this is them using our Decisions product. This black dotted line, as you see over a couple of graphs, that was last month. And so they're very happy how fast they could go, right? So this took us from 9 days on the happy path down to about 3 to 4 days on the happy path, which is amazing. So this team was super happy. This graph is closer to each other. What I know is that between last month and this month in this graph, they doubled their team size. So they did the same, it looks like they did the same amount of work, but they actually built twice as many properties in that time frame, which is very similar to this back graph right here. And then this team actually finished early, and so their team lead was actually able to take like a week off right there. He was done. He was done for the week, which was great for him. And then our department, we're still early in our MVP. There's still lots to come out, but we're seeing just already great improvements for the entire department as we ramp up on this process. And we, again, don't have time to go over this, but we did put this into practice recently. I'll go just briefly over it. Exec request came in and said, we need a QC step. We need to be able to do a quality control really fast, super urgent. Brady and I were actually in the office together. We sat down and we used this idea of I was handling logic, Brady was handling data, and we were able to output, test, get this all done in about 3 hours, so, which is good. And then they asked us to do more, so that's another, it's a good, bad problem to have. So we take our old process map, again, shout out to process mining, make sure you learn this, understand this. This really helps sell to your operations and your executive team what you're trying to accomplish when something looks like this. And the really cool feature is it will actually animate your process for you. So you can see over here on the left, this is the process we rebuilt and everything's super happy and flowing great. And then over here is the next place we're gonna automate. As you can see, everything just kind of bottlenecks right there at the end. So it's really easy to take this to an executive group and say, hey, we should probably talk about this here and get some priority against it. So,
well, nice thing is that they point it out.
Yes,
and
they're like, what's happening?
What is this going on over here? And so they see the problem first. It's really nice.
So process mining, make sure you're checking it out. With that, I'm gonna hop here. Thank you all for coming, and we will answer any questions you may have.
Yeah.
What tool were you using to manage the version control of like your outside development work? With people that just want to write straight code, and how easy was it accessible to like keep that version within decisions at the same time?
So versioning of our like REST APIs and managing that.
Not just the REST APIs, but custom code. Like if there's any custom Java that you're written, or any custom whatever language you're writing.
Yeah.
And
So
keep it like in version correctly within your flows and your outside repositories.
sure. So right now we just use like our generic like GitLab or GitHub type of that to control our versions. We do use Swagger UI and things like that to kind of help with our versioning with REST APIs, but also our web dev that we do. But usually what we'll do is we'll release and then we'll let dev go play around in decisions with it. And so, and a lot of times when we release a new version, we're not changing any of the contracts, we're not changing any of that because we don't need to. If we add fields, if we change things, that's where that data access layer really plays a key because the logic layer just handles it and knows what to do with it.
Those charts that you showed that showed last year, comparing last year's data to this year's data and see, let's say, a higher level of usage, you can able to take any like dollars or cost savings, like take it that next layer and see what the numbers look like for that?
We definitely did that, but we're not going to share that here. Proprietary, but it was good. It was very good.
Yeah, we combine that with FTE savings and how many like full-time employees that we could do. Yeah, we definitely did that analysis, but that tool made it a lot easier to do that. and visually see that and take it to an executive level. Besides us just saying, hey, we saved a lot of time. Cool.
So is that FTE would be one way to measure it, right?
Yeah.
And what were like 1 or 2 other ways that you were able to kind of take some measurable?
Yes, we did FTEs. We did timeliness, making like we wanted to make sure that no one was ever getting a bill the day before it was due. Right? That's not great. And then accuracy. We were able to build. Our legacy system had about 60 QC checks. We refined and moved the majority of them over. It made them better. And so accuracy was another one of like, yeah, not only are these bills faster, but they're more accurate to our residents.
Yeah, this reduction.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, we don't like having to rebill a property. That's not great.
Right.
No one likes that. When you get 2 utility bills in a month, that's not fun. Any other questions?
All right, I just want to say a big thank you again to Tyson and Brady.
Thank you.
Thank you.